Welcome to the Angus Report. I'm your host, Clint Mefford, and we're bringing you the latest cattle news and education. This month, we're focusing on next generation, part of the association's belief statement, Raising Standards. We discuss succession planning. The National Junior Angus Show is fast approaching. An Australian exchange student tells us about her experience in the U.S., and we head to Colorado to visit the Raftopoulos family of Diamond Peak Cattle Company. This is the Angus Report. Polly Dobbs, an attorney and owner of Dobbs Legal Group, encourages farmers and ranchers to be proactive and strategic in their approach to succession planning.
How are we going to get the stuff we own now to the next generation, either during lifetime or at death? And my biggest theme is that fair does not mean equal. You know, the simplest approach would be to sign a will that says, at my death, I leave everything equally to my kids and just let them work it out when I'm gone. And that's a terrible idea. I encourage my clients to draw a roadmap. You know, you have worked to build this ranch. It's your life's work. Draw a roadmap of what comes next and help your children know what they should do instead of just leaving it to chance. In order to keep an active ranch surviving in the next generation or two, special planning is required. If not all the children have been involved in the cattle operation, then they shouldn't be after death. There needs to be a careful analysis of how you get ownership in the cattle, in the genetics, in the inventory, to the ones who are involved in the ranching operations, and different assets to other children. And maybe it involves kind of a part sale, part gift, where the ranching child buys some of it from mom and dad or from siblings after death, or perhaps it's just all included in their share. That concept of sweat equity, you know, keeping your boots on the home farm and helping to grow the herd and perfect the genetics. You've earned that, and you gave up income you could have been earning off farm and benefits and things that are available in more corporate jobs. Instead, you were home. And so then you just find a way to be fair with the other children.
Dobbs says succession plans should be reevaluated regularly so that its content reflects changes in tax laws.
Somebody who had a perfectly great plan in place in the 90s, we've now had two major shifts in our estate tax laws. And so plans need to be dusted off and reviewed and tweaked to adjust to the change in the laws. The biggest danger to farmers and ranchers used to be the death tax, the federal estate tax, and the different state inheritance and estate taxes were big. The laws have changed a lot, and we have a much higher exemption now than we used to. But the value of a whole lot of farm and ranch land and assets have also increased. So in one regard, their balance sheet is keeping pace with the federal estate tax exemption that's increasing. So still, though, we're in a very estate tax friendly environment in that $22.36 million worth of assets can pass from a married couple to the next generation. So although death taxes used to be the largest risk to the family farm, now it's much more about family dynamics and just poor management, mismanagement at the next generation, and lawsuits. I mean, if there's one heir who has just been so counting on a certain inheritance, the amount, the way it's structured, it's cash right now, they've been banking on, and if that's not what they get, if a plan's been put in place and they get something else, like ownership in a ranching entity that provides them a stream of income, they might run to court and sue. And you can't stop people from suing. You can only put a plan in place that's so strong, they just don't have much incentive to pursue it. They immediately fail. But it still takes fees to defend that. Even if you're right and the plan ultimately holds up, it still takes fees to defend that. So in that regard, the biggest risk to the ranch is litigation. It's lawsuits after death because someone's disgruntled. So that brings me back to my other theme, which is talk about it. You define fairness, and then you tell everybody what's going to happen, and that really nips it in the bud.
Dobbs gives some practical examples to passing the estate on to the next generation, but notes that finding the right fit for your operation is key to being successful.
Many times, the farm and the ranch, it's all together. It's all mom and dad's. It's not owned differently. It's all together in one pot. And if at the next generation there need to be certain children involved with cattle and the ranch and other children not, then some careful planning during lifetime really helps with that. So for example, the machinery shed, the barn, the grain bins, the cattle, the nitrogen tank with all the valuable contents should all be owned separately during lifetime. And that might mean you have to pay a few $100s for a survey so someone can split the large parcel so that the improvements and the land underneath them are separate. And then it's easy to pass those differently, either through sales during lifetime, gifts during lifetime, or through inheritance. They're different. And then all the other land, the pastures and the hay ground and the grain and whatever it looks like, that can be treated differently. And maybe all the children do own that with some restrictions in place so that what they do is lease it back to the child who has the livestock and the cattle operation. It strikes a fair balance. It makes the teeter-totter closer to equal. Instead of, all the land and operations together would put one so much higher than another. And that plan works well for some, but it's not the right plan for everyone. So when I'm preaching about fair doesn't mean equal, I'm really challenging each individual rancher to define fairness. And when you hear other stories about how different folks have done it, you might say, that's a terrible idea for our family. We could never do that. Well, that's helpful information. You can cross one off your list, focus on other types of plans that might be the right fit.
If you're looking for a starting point, Dobbs recommends conducting a self-inventory of your assets so the next steps in the succession planning process can be determined.
Something that's accurate with current fair market value, how things are titled, if they're joint or if they're in just husband or just wife. If it's a contract asset like a retirement plan or a life insurance policy or an annuity, those all have beneficiary designations. And so who is named as the current primary and contingent beneficiary? All those details are so important as what I call home base of succession planning. What are you worth? Who currently gets what at death? And then what adjustments do we need to make? Succession planning is like a jigsaw puzzle, and there are so many different pieces. And if you get most of it right and miss one, it all falls apart. So doing a self-inventory, organizing information about your family members and assets, and doing a lot of self-education will help a lot.
Talk with your local advisors about updating your estate plan. Stay tuned, we'll be back with more Angus Report after a break.
Welcome back to the Angus Report. National Junior Angus Association members and their families will show for the purple as they make their way to Louisville, Kentucky for the 2019 National Junior Angus Show, July 14th through the 20th. The NJAS is the world's largest single beef breed show and an annual highlight for hundreds of Angus youth and their families. Visit njas.info for more details. Mark your calendars to attend the 2019 Angus Convention at the Reno Sparks Convention Center in Reno, Nevada, November 2nd through the 4th. Hosted with the 136th Annual Convention of Delegates, the Angus Convention offers hands-on education, face-to-face networking, and country music entertainment. The Angus Genomics Symposium and Innovation Workshops from Neogen, as well as Angus University, will be featured again this year. The event also features a John Deere Grand Prize giveaway and certified Angus beef brand meals throughout the weekend. Registration and hotel blocks will open July 1st at angusconvention.com. The 2019 Lead Conference themed Angus Live from Nashville is set for August 1st through the 4th. The National Junior Angus Board has planned leadership and personal skill building activities for NJA participants 14 to 21 years old. Early registration for juniors is $250 and is due June 15th, after which registration increases to $275. Space is limited, so register early. Visit angus.org/NJAA for details and to register.
We check in now on the latest cattle market news with the Cattle Facts Update.
Hello, and welcome to the Cattle Facts Update. I'm Tanner A. Heron. So far in 2019, cattle on feed in Canada has been running well above a year ago. On May 1st, just over 1 million head were on feed in yards with a one-time capacity of at least 1,000. This was 10.4% greater than last year and the biggest May number since 2010. The elevated on-feed has contributed to the year-over-year growth and total live cattle imports from Canada. With Canadian feed yards near capacity, there has been more feeder cattle movement to the U.S., as feeder cattle imports from Canada are up 12% year-to-date. Total slaughter cattle imports from Canada have experienced a similar trend. Through May 4th, they are up over 45,000 head, or 32% compared to last year. During that same time, domestic slaughter has also increased 218,000 head, or 2%. Cattle on feed north of the border is expected to seasonally decline through the summer, but still remain inflated. This supports that Canadian feeder and slaughter cattle will be destined for the U.S. at a growing rate versus 2018. A similar story has developed in Mexico as their beef cow herd has expanded over 1 million head the last 5 years, creating a larger supply of feeder cattle. Year-to-date, feeder cattle imports from Mexico are running almost 100,000 head, or 22% above a year ago. Of those feeder cattle, 23% have been heifers, up from 19% during the same time last year. Currently, slaughter-ready cattle from Mexico are not eligible to enter the U.S. Looking ahead, CattleFax projects 2019 total U.S. slaughter to be up roughly 440,000 head, or 1.4% compared to last year. Couple the growing U.S. cattle supply with increasing imports from both Canada and Mexico, and this becomes a very realistic target. For the Angus Report and CattleFax, I'm Tanner Ahearn.
To learn more about CattleFax, your leading source for beef industry market information, visit cattlefax.com.
Next on the Angus Report, we visit with an exchange student from Australia. Stay with us.
Welcome back. Annabel Butler, an exchange student from the University of Queensland in Australia, came to the U.S. to study animal science for a semester. On a scholarship from Angus, Australia, in conjunction with Kansas State University, Butler has gained a more global perspective of beef production to take back to her home country.
So I've been at K-State for about maybe 10 weeks now, but yeah, I've loved it. It's been a really cool experience. It's the people there are really great, and probably what makes it the best, they're just also passionate about animal science. And probably the most interesting thing about being at K-State and being in the US is the difference in the production systems. So, it's the same end product, but how you guys get to your end product compared to Australia is quite different in some circumstances in terms of using row crops to graze cattle, dry lodding cows, that kind of thing has been really interesting. The classes that I've taken have been great. They're super hands-on compared to what I did in Australia. So I grew up on a mixed enterprise farm, so we're predominantly cropping cereal grains and cotton, but we also have kind of a mixed commercial herd where we use Angus cattle in that herd. And from there I went to university in Australia at the University of Queensland and studied a Bachelor of Animal Production and Agribusiness, and then from there worked in the packing industry for Tees Australia for a year before coming over here to the US to complete this scholarship. The biggest difference between the US and the Australian beef industry is the whole stocker industry and that segment of the beef supply chain. We don't have a stocker industry or something that would be defined as a stocker industry in Australia, so I think that there is a huge market for kind of taking that and implementing it into the Australian beef industry. I think that there is a need for it. I mean, obviously feedlotting in Australia is nowhere near as big as the US, but I think that there is definitely potential to incorporate that and actually be making more money from, like backgrounding cattle in a yard rather than on grass, for example, whether that's saving the physical space or it's saving you in feed costs. I think that's a really exciting opportunity to take back. So my future plans are, after returning from the US to Australia, to find work somewhere in kind of the production sector, so the live animal sector of the beef supply chain. So I want to be on farm, involved with the day-to-day activities, but I also want to combine my knowledge of genetics and nutrition and that kind of thing, either within my own pastoral operation or in a consulting sense, so that I can either help others with the sustainability of their own enterprise and the bettering of their own enterprise, or do that within my own herd. We have to work to keep people coming into this industry, to keep the next generation going. And we also have to work with our product, so the beef, to kind of keep competing in a global market. I mean, I know Australia and the US are technically competitors, but for us to keep our beef being the best in the world in each of our own opinions, we need to kind of differentiate and figure out how to produce it better, cheaper, all of those things to make sure that we're competitive, and then that us coming in to the beef industry as the next generation have a fair chance and actually get to continue on with that legacy. As part of my scholarship with the Angus Australia Association, I'm here at the American Angus Association office to spend a bit of time with the people in various departments here and learn a bit about what they do here as part of the association. And I would like to say thank you to both Angus Australia and the American Angus Association for allowing me to have this opportunity and this experience. I've met some really great people and I've learned a lot during my time here, so thank you.
Up next, we visit the Raftopoulos family in Colorado. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Angus Report. The Raftopoulos family is comprised of 3 generations of Angus cattlemen in the heart of Colorado cattle country. A business-minded grandmother set the pace for the family to be successful in their cattle business, which began in 1924. Wide-open Colorado spaces have allowed the family to expand their operation and ensure the best handling practices and healthy outcomes for their herd.
You know, the immigrants, when they came, most of them didn't have much when they came, so they had a very good work ethic, a strong sense of family, and just the desire to do well. Most of my family and most of the people in this area actually are from the mountainous part of Greece. So they naturally just gravitated when they came to an area that looked kind of like home. My mother's first husband started here. It was all sheep. They run 2,000 to 3,000 sheep. He died in 1948. My mother went back in 1950 to Greece, married my father, and then came over. So my dad had like 15 or 20 cows. Of course, they were all named and everything else too, but mostly from a milk cow. I got interested in the cattle when I got back in 1978 and we started to grow the cow herd.
My yaya, my grandma, she was like a fierce negotiator and like I said, had a lot of drive and tough. And my papu was more of a philosopher and a thinker and like I said, he's a real well-educated man.
I can see it in my dad and I saw it in his parents about just the pride that they take in their work, and you kind of see that through the Greek culture as well. It's just everybody's really prideful on their work and prideful of what they are as a family and keeping that tight-knit family and keeping the tradition alive, and that's, cooking lambs on the spit, and that's, going to church, and it's all those things tied into it, and it's the ranch life, and it's pretty cool to see that I definitely see my father trying to carry on those traditions as well, and on the business side too. I see how my grandmother and how they ran their business. I can see that in my father, and she's a really good businessman, and he's passed that down to me and George as well.
My wife was a second generation. Her parents were first generation. She was second generation, but also came from immigrant parents. She always said, if you want your children to do well and to be following your footsteps, to take over your business, you have to take them with you at an early age. And then when you take them with them, you don't always make it miserable for them. Like I said, the business it's not always a fun business. You have to put up with heat and dust.
It's dusty and there's droughts and bad storms.
And then freezing cold and wind and snow. And
you're out there riding in the dust and wind all day, or it snows on you and you don't have a coat.
Bad calving season, bad labor.
You get thrown down off a horse and it hurts.
Bad market.
You brought the wrong boots.
If you transmit that to your kids, that it's a miserable life, they're not going to come back.
But like the accomplishment of just like Brandon today, or getting the cattle worked is just like, it's one of those feelings that you can't replace, and that's what we got as a young kid too, from going with our dad or our mom or whatever it be all the time, putting out salt, rounding up cows, or so it kind of gets in your blood and it kind of just stays there, so we're lucky enough to be here and at this point to grow into another generation. This is my mom's best friend, my papu, my mom's dad. I think that's Angelo right there, and that's my mom with her smile. It shows off how vibrant she was, and with my papu too.
When my father really started to grow this operation, he had a vision that nobody else really saw. He had a vision of cattle and artificial insemination and kind of where the industry would go, and we started that way back then. He's always had a really, mechanical mind, and he likes to put stuff on paper and he can think it out, and, he's really good at designing things, and you know, that goes from houses to corrals to just pretty much everything.
The thing is about a corral, you have to have a kind of know cow psychology to build a good one. But when you run as many cattle as we do, you got to work efficiently. Cattle usually like to go in a circle, or they like to go back to where they came from. So we try to look at the pasture and try to figure out how they like to, if they like to go uphill or downhill, or where they like to congregate in certain corners.
And so now I've kind of stepped into that too, as far as I like to draw and I like to design stuff too, kind of like he does. And it's pretty impressive when you sit back and you look at all the corrals and all the systems, and you see, you know, and how they just keep growing. You know, we kind of never stop, and that's kind of our motto, is always forward.
Always striving to be better. I mean, I think that's a trait from my yaya, or, you know, even the ancestors coming over from Greece, always striving for something better. And that's what he was doing in the cow side of it.
You know, me and George, we're millennials. We're born in a different generation, obviously, and so we have different, you know, things and different images that we want this place to go, and places we want this, you know, business to grow, and that doesn't absolutely line up exactly with, you know, what our father or what our grandfathers have done.
And me, being 65 years old and turning over a lot of this stuff to my children, I've had a little problem in transition sometimes, but I'm adjusting. It's hard to turn over. I remember my dad thought I was completely crazy when we started buying lots of cattle, but we just transitioned, and he had to kind of adjust to some of the things that I was doing.
At the same time, we have that in our genes and our blood, just like they did. We have the business sense like they did, but now it's up to us to change it so we don't go out of business.
You know, leading by example is another huge principle when you're raising a family or children. Like I said, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have. I mean, usually you just sell out. What are you going to do? You get old. You can't do it. You can only do it so long. More of the wealthier people, they never return back to the family, the actual people that work, that own it and work it. With time, there's going to be less and less people like that. But no, I'm real fortunate that my children have taken over those roles. But like I said, the important thing is to lead by example, and I hope I've been a good example.
Well, it's great to see multiple generations involved at the ranch. And that's a wrap for this week's Angus Report. Tune in next week for industry-leading news and education, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Angus TV, for more highlights from the association. We'll see you next week.